Wait, I'll talk for you while you get your
Yeah,
throat
it's
cleared.
me. I didn't
Okay.
remember the name of the author, but
How far are you in the book?
I'm on the chapter 3.
Have you already discussed the veil of ignorance?
Ignorance? No, I haven't seen anything about ignorance.
Okay, well, it's coming then. Haha. um, Spoiler. So Rawls comes with this famous metaphor. He says everybody who is rich or is doing well typically thinks that society is fair, right? Because it's fair to them, and they want everybody else to believe it's fair too. But what if we do a thought experiment where you actually don't know who you are? He says, let's say you have to write the Constitution before you're born, which of course psychologically is impossible, but let's say we'd have kind of a reset, right? So you already have your consciousness, but then you die again, and you can be born again, but you don't know who you will be born as. So there's a veil of ignorance between you and your position. You could be the son of a crack whore, or you could be the daughter of Carlos Slim. You don't know what it's going to be, right? If that is so, you probably would end up with some sort of socialism, or at least social liberalism, he says. You would not go for this hard capitalism because this 0.18% chance would now become a very tangible thing to you, right? You wouldn't joke about that so easily if you could be poor, and since majority is poor, you wouldn't want to take that risk. You would write the rules in a way that give a little bit more opportunities in people of different sort of position, including you could be born without legs, right? You don't know that. So you would be more careful about how opportunities are distributed. And then again, when Diego finishes the book, he can elaborate on this theory. But it's an interesting way of thinking, right? It's a nice thought experiment. Of course, thought experiments make particularly weak politics, but for academics, this is nice to think about. So what should we do then? What should the state do differently? What should politics do differently? Well, it should create opportunities, in short, for people. Why? Liberalism is a very optimistic theory. It assumes that society is full of these awesome individuals who are very rational, rationally self-centered, but who are also moral, right? Liberals are not conservatives. They don't think people are bad. Um, so they think people should be self-interested, but they think that somehow they will also have some kind of moral character which would stop them from cheating. Now, the Mexican experience is quite sobering in that regard, right? That people wouldn't cheat, especially people with power. And liberals, kind of social liberals, also know this. They know that these good individuals that somehow inhabit our market, they don't just appear out of nowhere. They're not like the natural product of things. They're produced by society. Only a particular society will produce in large numbers these type of subjects, right? Um, you cannot just see somebody lose from that. If you were raised by gang members, or if you were raised inside a prison, which can happen, by the way, if your mother is pregnant when she goes to prison, you're obviously not going to come out with the same morals as someone who was raised outside prison. Um, and thus you cannot really see somebody lose from their context. If society doesn't offer people chances to develop themselves, they won't, right? Just like if society doesn't offer jobs, it doesn't matter if you study. If society doesn't offer people opportunities, then there's not much to do, right? There's not much freedom to be had, after all. And so politics has to create these opportunities, has to create positions for people, has to create ways that people could be integrated into society. Because that's at the end where things happen, right? As I explained before, being free doesn't mean, but it can mean that, but most people don't want to just jump around in the jungle or live in some hut in the mountains to be free. Most people want to be something, but that being something implies society, right? Because it takes place within a structure, and society must organize that. Or in the words of Thomas Green, forgot what the H stand for. Anyway, we content ourselves. Thomas Green is the original social liberal. We content ourselves with enacting that no man shall be used by other men as a means against his will. In other words, negative liberty. But we leave it to be pretty much a matter of chance whether or not he shall be qualified to fulfill any social function, to contribute anything to the common good, and to do so freely, right? You leave people alone and, oh yeah, they're going to be free, but you don't know if they can even read, right? Maybe, it depends who their parents are, right? So that doesn't, he says, that doesn't generate maximum freedom. Yeah. People could be free, but it's not guaranteed. And we can do a bit more in political theory to organize this freedom, to organize this well-being, he says. Wait, any questions so far before I move forward? No? I'm going very fast.
No.
I have a comment.
Good.
So, like in social liberalism, we can see a lot of like charity, like helping other people. And it's kind of funny that is the actual structure who is made only for certain like groups, like capitalism. Like it's not pro indigenous or pro women or even non-divergent people. So it's kind of funny that we think that like the state helping or being kind of paternalist with the people who are more vulnerable than others, they are going to solve the problem, when the actual system is the one who perpetuates all like the situations that require help.
Well, that would be the critique from the left on this. When it comes to identity politics, social liberals are very good in playing that game because it costs nothing, right? You wear a pink sweater like Trudeau. Now you did something for the world, right? Liberals love cheap stuff, so they like identity politics because you have a female vice president. You're half black. Hey, like you do things for the world by basically existing. So they're very good at incorporating the virtue signaling part of that. And they will care about it. For example, a social liberal thing could be to have quota in universities, like you need this many black people in a US case, right? Or with scholarships, etc. They will care more than any other right-wing ideology about this. Let's say it like that. But yeah, you can have the systemic critique that the worst slave owner is the one who's nice to the slaves, right? To sum it up like that. But let's look a bit deeper at this freedom they want to generate for society, right? Because they're quite serious about it. And in a way, they have a more serious concept of freedom than libertarians do in some sense. Because they make this separation between positive and negative freedom, right? You read a text about it from Berlin. Berlin is also a social liberal. Although Berlin uses the words, he uses positive liberty a bit different than the others do. It's not super different from it, but it's more complex what he's talking about. In the normal way of using it, that I agree would use it, positive liberty just refers to a positive understanding of something. Positive means substantial, that there's something there. If I make let's say I make, if I would make a negative case for Clara Luz, that would mean that I would talk about how all the others are terrible, right? And she's the least worst. If I would make a positive case for her, I would talk about which qualities I like. Yeah. And the same goes with freedom. A negative freedom means that freedom is there because other things are not there, right? There's nobody violating your privacy. There's nobody torturing you. There's nobody intervening with you. While positive liberty is freedom that is there because something is fulfilled. So it's the ability to actually do it. If this is vague to you, the simple example that I always give is of a person in a wheelchair trying to get up the stairs. Negative liberty means that you don't push them up the stairs or you don't stop them from going up the stairs. But they can't get up the stairs anyway because they can't walk, right? So they don't have the positive freedom to actually get up the stairs because it's not going to happen. Positive freedom would mean that you would build some kind of ramp that they can roll their wheelchair up to, because now it can actually happen. Yes. So positive freedom means that you can actually do what you want and not just try to do it, which would be the negative liberty part. Or that you can do it with dignity, right? Because a wheelchair person could get up the stairs if he would crawl on like his arms to get up the stairs, and that's what they would have to do. But it's not very dignified, right? Just like, oh, you poor student girls, right? Stop complaining. Why don't you start your own OnlyFans, right? You just dye your hair differently, you learn some dance moves, and that you could pay for your studies, right? That would be negative liberty, but it's not, doesn't come with dignity, right? So to have positive liberty, you need to enable people to do so. You need to let them do it with dignity, not through self-prostitution or something, right? And that doesn't come with just the absence of rules. It's not that simple if you want to reach that in society. So if you want more freedom, and freedom means people doing what they want, well, achieving what they want, you need to organize a bit. So in contrast to the neoliberals, social liberals don't think that the state is this ultimate obstacle. They understand state repression and they're very skeptical of it. And they don't want a big government either. But they understand that the state is not the only obstacle to people's freedom, right? When we talked about the neoliberals, I talked about the yin of neoliberalism. We talked about that they try to portray it as the state is like this ultimate obstacle in your life, right? The government and the SAT, they're your main problems in life. They're holding you back. And then people go, oh yeah, the SAT. It's always funny when people share memes about the SAT, but they don't pay taxes. I'm like, do you even have a contract? No. Well, then nothing to do with them. Anyway, so they're like the main enemies, right? Well, social liberals understand this is not necessarily true. Yes, they're the enemies, but there's a whole lot of other enemies in life, right? There's a whole lot of other people who can get in your way, or who can stop you, or who can exploit you in society. And you also need protection from them, because power is very unequally distributed. And one could argue that your boss has far more power over your life than the SAT does, or your landlord, for example, right? So in these unequal power relations, a lot of free choices become kind of meaningless because you don't actually have a choice. You have a choice, but you only have two bad options. One example of this is an important debate. It's a ridiculous debate, but it must be had. Is neoliberals have this theory about sweatshops. Sweatshops are these, hard exploitation mini factories, right? Where they say sweatshops are good because people want to work there. People could have also become criminals and murder each other for money, but they didn't do it. They chose to work in the factory. So we must respect their choice, right? Who am I to say that your wage is too low? You wanted to work there. Social liberal will say that this is bullshit because the choice between being a murderer or a slave is not, it's yay, freedom, right? It's not exactly a great choice, and it's meaningless. If my choice between doing what you say or die of my family dying of hunger, this is not real. This is an absurd formalistic form of freedom, right? Not that anyone would experience as freedom. So the state could do other things. The state's not the only thing that gets in your way. You need to actually have the capabilities to be free. Now I want to introduce you to some concepts of another social liberal here. I'm going quite fast. I'm jumping from thing to thing, just trying to get some concepts out there. One social liberal that is quite popular still today, and I think he's still alive, is Amartya Sen. Amartya Sen is an Indian economist, won Nobel Prize, not about this, writing about hunger. And Sen came with this framework of capabilities, the capability approach. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's a very popular thing. I hate it, but we'll get to that later. Capability approach is an approach to freedom or to welfare, where you say that what the goal should be of politics is that people should have the capacities or the capabilities, not capacity, the capabilities to exercise certain freedom. What does that mean? The capability is that you have all the things needed to actually do something. Doesn't mean you have to do it. You might never do it, or you might fail at it, but you must have everything you need to at least attempt to do it. So that is the means to do it, right? The ability to do it and the opportunity to do it. So for example, this most simple example is to ride a bike. To ride a bike, you need different things. You need a bike. B, you need to be allowed to ride a bike, like the law must allow it. And C, you must know how to ride a bike, right? Without these three things, you can't ride a bike. So it says it's not just material stuff. There's other things that people need in order to be able to do something, right? You need both knowledge, you need rules that enable you, and you need some material starting point. That doesn't mean that you're actually going to succeed, right? You just must give people, again, the capability of that you could have done it. That's how society should be organized. So basically, this is about creating small opportunities for poor people. That's concretely what Sen is about. That's a way of understanding positive freedom, right? And it's a persuasive framework. I personally hate it because I'm a poverty scholar, and this is very popular in my field, but it's impossible to put into practice. Standard socialist measures like we're going to raise the wage are 100 times more effective than breaking it down to 1,000 pieces. And okay, now we get people ride the bike. Now we want them to be able to take the bus. Okay, let's break that down into 1,000 pieces instead of just giving them more money. And this is very difficult to do as an actual policymaker. But anyway, it's philosophically, it's nice. So that's one way of looking at things, right? To get positive freedom, to make sure people can actually do things. And that requires some things in the end of politics. So if we translate this then to public policy, to, well, actual stuff, we can see the contrast with the libertarians, right? They think that the most freedom is not reached by the state not being there. Most freedom is reached by the state enabling people to be free. Both logics can be valid, right? I'm not taking sides, I'm explaining one here. So they will allow for some minimal state intervention. Primarily, their focus is going to be on education, right? Because again, this is the ultimate apple cake philosophy, and there's nothing safer in life than to say that we should have more education, right? Any conversation you're in ever, just answer education. People gonna like you. But basic education, right? People should be able to go to school. That's it. That's it. Primary education shouldn't even be free. They're not saying that. It just should be there, right? Accessible. People should have the capability, the chance, the opportunity to at least do it. And a lot of social liberal thinkers place a lot of importance on it. Some of the, for example, John Dewey is a very important philosopher of education who comes from this tradition, who talks about the relevance of education in people's life. So they'll place a lot of emphasis on that. So did Obama, for example. So what then does that result in if we talk about things social liberals do, right? Well, in Obama's case, after school programs, for example, that you have schools, they suck, but after school, when you still can't go home because your parents work 2 jobs, right? The government will organize some extra, playground thingy, and that does help. Research indicates with getting kids on the right path. So this kind of things, scholarships are very, very social liberal concept, right? Again, they're different from the socialist one. AMLO gives every child that goes to school money, right? Well, the poorer ones, the ones that need it, but all of them. That's the Becca's Benito Juarez program. The liberal variant is that, okay, if you have good grades, then you're going to get a scholarship, etc., etc. Right? It's enabling the talent, the normal logic of scholarships. But just you see the contrast with the socialist variant. It's about allowing the state to do basic things. Like, they're not for total privatization. For example, they don't think that water should be privatized. They think that everybody should have access to sewers and that everybody should have access to electricity, right? Some kind of basic access. Although that can still happen in a free market, right? If a private company can supply it and they're under contract of the government, that's cool too. Like public transport in Monterrey is, right? So they're from some minimum floor of services that the government should provide. Again, to kind of have a same starting point. To have a minimum similar base from which people would start in life. Rehab programs are a social liberal thing. Again, from the logic that you can't just let people be. If people come out of prison or if people are drug addicts, it is statistically predictable this will go wrong. And if you understand this, you could as well try to do something about it. Because, well, if you've been to prison in Mexico for 10 years, you come out a criminal. That's just a fact. So if we don't ignore this, we're going to try to do something about it. Not too much, right? Again, minimum opportunities, but we're going to offer some course or something to ex-prisoners, while the libertarian would not do that. The libertarian would never let them go, actually, from prison, or the neoliberal, if they had the choice. Microloans. Microloans is like the ultimate social liberal thing. So poor people, right? What's the solution? That you start your own business. How do you start your own business? By taking a microloan, right? So you can right? You like the archetypical idea is that you buy a blender with it and then you make, lemonade from lemons in life, right? Like that's the kind of imaginary there. Or you buy, I don't know, whatever, a cooker for your taco stand or something, right? Of course, microloans are very popular 10 years ago. Like, they thought this was going to change the world. Of course, people with taco stands are also poor, right? This doesn't necessarily change their life that much, but it can help. Now this concept is a bit less glamorous because this looked great the first 3 years until people had to pay back. And then, like, people start selling their kidneys and stuff. And like, oh, well, microloans, maybe not that great. But anyway, that's a very social liberal thing. I'm being too skeptical here. Can be very successful in some conditions. Because again, what you're doing here is you're recognizing that you don't really have a free market if people don't have access to capital, right? If people cannot start, this whole entrepreneurial rhetoric is just empty. So you try to do that. Coaching programs are very social liberal, very popular today in Europe. So coaching is, your life is bad. Here's a person whose life is not bad. They're going to tell you how to do it, right? Buddy programs. Here's a buddy. Have a buddy, right? Not actually a friend. This person who tells you what you're doing wrong with your life, right? Now I'm making a bit fun of it, but you also have serious variants of it, like social work, right? You don't understand how to do all this paperwork. So Tom comes by on Tuesdays and Tom helps you understand the paperwork. That's useful. Things like that, right? You help people get along. You don't give them money, you give them help, right? You give them the capability to do that. And also minimum regulation of contracts. This is actually where social liberalism originally came from. From the hardcore liberals would say that contracts should be totally free. You can agree on anything with another person, right? Including selling them your son or something, but like you can agree on anything. So you could have any wage contract. While that would naturally lower wages, right? So they say, no, we should have a minimum wage, right? There should be some absolute minimum that you cannot negotiate below. Because again, people are going to be in situations where they're not actually making free choices. The same you could argue, for example, with loans. Total free contract in loans means that people who are really desperate could take a loan at like 70% interest, which is disastrous if you do that. If you don't pay back immediately, you never will, at 70% interest rate. So like protecting people from obvious bad deals. Same with rent, right? There should be certain basic framework on how the relation between a tenant and a landlord can go. Especially that example, I think, is where Green started his theory from, and then he kind of generalized to other things in society. So these are the kind of things that social liberals do, right, or want to. What separates them from the neoliberals in practice. Do you have questions about any of these examples I gave?
Do they like achieve something good, or they were just like programs that just lost resources?
For what?
Well, like they work, like one.
In my opinion, as a poverty scholar, not very much. I think these things work. If you test them individually, they would work. But these type of, if you compare this to good old socialist interventions, they're far more effective. Brazil cut its poverty in half under one socialist legislation. Bolivia cut its poverty in half under Morales. No social liberal has done that, or even close, or even bigger than maybe 3% reduction. So if you just look at raw efficiency, no. But you have to balance that against the values, right? They don't want to give up too much freedom. They don't want socialism. So within liberalism, this is the best you can do. And it depends a bit on what it is. For example, things like after-school programs, because a bit more general, or minimum regulation, these things do work, right? Minimum wages work. Let's see, what of these things would I go for? School programs, well, basic utility, that's obvious, right? Rehabilitation can work. Depends how much money's in it too. Again, there you go with again with rehabilitation. The question is, how much can you change a person without changing their environment, right? If you come out of jail, you go straight back to the hood, where all your neighbors are criminals and there's no work. You can have a coach, and that coach can tell you to stay away from these bad people, and that can work for people. But you're not going to have a very high success rate, right? It's better than not doing it. So I'm for all of these things. I'm not for microloans, but I'm for all these other things. You just should have moderate expectations of what this is going to do. But what it will do, ideologically, is protect you from criticism because you're doing something about it, right? And that's an important thing that they bring to the table for liberals. But we would have to discuss case by case here. Some things work, some things don't, but they're not spectacular necessarily. And partly the goal of these things is defensive. It's about not making it worse, right? Because what they want ultimately, they don't want welfare for all. Like, that's not the goal. The goal is to protect capitalism from falling apart. And it does achieve that to some extent, because you prevent the worst type of excesses, and that keeps the system stable. So it is related to kind of roll into what I was going to say next. It is still liberalism because the goal of it is to save capitalism, right? Well, the goal of it is to create liberty. Yeah, that's one thing. But also it protects capitalism from itself in a way. It takes away the worst excesses of the system, or at least it tries to do that, right? A lot depends on the quality of the leader too. So let's say in Obama's case, for example, with Obamacare, which is like a semi-healthcare thingy, it stopped people from dying. But it's still a bad program. It's a very bad program. It's extremely inefficient. And it did drive up prices, but hey, it stopped people from dying if you had any pre-existing condition. So it saves the worst. Like, it puts some bottom to the system. And from that you can go different ways, right? It depends how serious you are about this intervention. You could have a strong social liberalism that takes its own idea of positive freedom very serious. This would be kind of the capability variant of it, and that comes close to socialism. They can agree on a lot of things, like basic services, education, etc. So they can partner up with each other. You sometimes see these type of coalitions happen, or become each other in a way, right? Like transition from one to the other. That's definitely possible. What's also possible is, of course, that they ally with an under attack by a small barbarian. He can come in if he. Are you guys gonna leave?
What?
Are you gonna leave soon? Anyway, what do you want, friend? Are you gonna come talk about social liberalism? No. What do you want? Can I say hi? No. I'm not coming with you. Listen. Help. Sorry for this. Friend. What's your opinion about social liberalism? Okay. Say hi. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, friend. You have to go, no? You got to take my glasses, no?
He doesn't care about social liberalism.
Not yet. Not yet. He's more of a communist right now. He's about that shared property, you know. And he was taken by mommy. Good. Where was I?
That
How
was
they ally,
a
right?
lovely intervention.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So it works. He was not happy about that. It can work well with socialism. It can also naturally ally with its normal liberal friends, right? that's the more natural ally in this. So what you often see is neoliberalism, who has like a neoliberal party will be the main one, and they'll have a social liberal party in their government who they will give the social positions. Like they will give them education, they will give them work, and they will be, let's say, the face of it, right? Hey, everybody projects. In the background, you're privatizing stuff, but in the foreground, you're doing after-school programs with kids, you know, like the Michelle Obama eat healthy type of stuff. On the foreground, in the background, you're deregulating banks, etc. So that alliance is more likely to happen. Well, both are possible. So that's the natural partner. See, the socialists or other liberals. Social liberals get a bit less along with the other ideologies because their idea of freedom and their more extended idea of freedom, it just has little to do with nationalism. There's not real overlap in values there. It has nothing to do with conservatism. With some forces of conservatism, it can go along, and it has nothing with communism. So those are the ideologies that it mixes less with. Although, we should always remember that Jair Bolsonaro is from the Social Liberal Party. That's where he came from. He was social liberal all his life, and then suddenly he was like, but I could become president if I'm a fascist. And it's like, see you later, suckers, I'm going this way. And he just 180 flipped. Anyway, but he's not representative of them. So that's how it relates to these other ideologies. Now let's end on some criticism. I'm not going to repeat any criticism of liberalism, right? Most things that you could say against liberalism also go here. But what's specific about social liberalism? So we should, I think, recognize that social liberalism sounds very reasonable, right? You're going to start from one position, then you're going to say, yeah, I know there's problems with it, therefore I'm going to do this and this and that. You kind of automatically sound reasonable because you start from a self-criticism here. However, you could say that by trying to do this and by trying to appeal, you lose both ways. You're not achieving the liberal utopia that the neoliberals think exists, right? Because you're still allowing the state, and if you just went all out capitalism, these problems would disappear and you wouldn't need to try to solve them, right? You're just keeping us stuck. You're holding us back with not allowing total freedom. Nor are you actually solving any of these problems, right? From a more Marxist perspective, from a conservative perspective. So it's neither here nor there, you could say. What you're definitely not doing is reaching an utopia, because you're not trying in a way, right? You're not trying to go all out in one direction or the other. Okay, that's kind of a neutral critique, right? In the sense that you could make that from any angle, and that goes for any centrist ideology. And from to repeat a bit what Sophia said, from a social communist perspective, this just doesn't do enough. It doesn't change the structure, doesn't change the causes of things. It just repairs them a bit faster. So it understands the problems of capitalism. It just doesn't do enough, you would say. And again, to defend social liberalism again, it's a trade-off, right? You know you could do more, you just don't want to, because doing more would cost more resources and cost more freedom. And that's what you value, right? This is the best you can do. This is the best offer you can make. Now to have some, I love this quote. This is a critique of all this type of paternalistic rich people who are going to solve poverty one day thinking. It's from Oscar Wilde. I don't know if you know Oscar Wilde. The great Oscar Wilde is an Irish poet, early icon of the gay movement, actually. He wrote an essay, a classic essay called "The Soul of Man Under Socialism." And in there, he has this critique of, let's say, the rich charity. He says, this is classic stuff. They say they try to solve the problem of poverty, for instance, by keeping the poor alive, or in the case of a He's talking about social liberals, by amusing the poor. But this is not the solution. It's an aggravation of the difficulty. The proper aim is to try and reconstruct society on such a basis that poverty would be impossible, right? There would be the big, let's say, counter to this way of thinking. Nonetheless, there's not that much criticism to be had, right? I personally, I wish all liberals were social liberals. I don't see much reasons not to. Besides, if you truly believe that competition is some kind of magical formula, and if we only go all the way through it, right? That it's like in karate when you're trying to break this block, and it only works if you like risk it all. Like then suddenly you go like if it's like that, if we just need to go all in on capitalism to reach utopia, then I understand why not. But outside of that, I don't see, I don't think you have real good reasons not to be a social liberal if you're liberal, but that's my opinion. What do you think? What's your reaction to this? What questions does it bring to your mind, etc.?
I will say that uh, this theory reminds me a lot to Movimiento Ciudadano,
Yes.
which in theory they are uh, social democrats, but I think they are more into this theory of social liberalism.
Yes, in Mexico, they would be the one who should be this. They're not, at least in Nuevo Leon, they're not particularly policy oriented. Um, but on paper, yes, Movimiento would be this party within the Mexican spectrum. That's a good observation, sir. Any other observations or questions you have? Ms. Mariana, what do you think?
I think it looks a lot like, well, like liberalism, but with an excuse to then say, like, you didn't try enough.
Okay, okay. That's something Obama would say, actually.
Mhm.
We,
Like,
we
we give
all,
everything.
yeah.
You didn't do enough coaching.
Yes, but better for there to be coaching than not, I would say.
Also, this theory is this meme where it's it's a military how do you say Air
Soldier.
Force
Okay.
ship
Uh-huh.
with the LGBTQ flag, the feminist flag, and they are dropping bombs. I think this that meme is social liberalism.
Well, except that, okay, it's true if we take Obama as the case, or Macron, but actually all of them. But the true social, the theorist, let's say it like that, would be anti-war. I think all of these guys are not in favor of war. Again, war comes with restriction of freedom, right, for the people in it. Um, and the theorists, I think Berlin, Green, Sen, Rawls, I think especially Rawls, are all pacifists. So that's more of a fault of the leaders, I think, than the theory of it. But yeah, if you think of the guys I put in the pictures earlier, that is true of them. Yeah. All
I would
right.
also
Yes.
like to mention that I I know that maybe this is like more personal, but I have kind of a problem when the only solution for things is education, because I feel that even education as a structure, like it's pretty oppressive and definitely works in favor of the the bourgeoisie class. Like education doesn't consider different types of learning or non-divergent people or even people of color. Like even in education, you can be like you can see how the big structure, like in this case, well, capitalism is. So okay, maybe education will work, but for some people that have certain characteristics, that probably is a male, a white cis male, because okay, then that for a part, but also what's the point of having, too much education and degrees if you will later will not be able to find any job, because first there's no job, and second you, well, not, you are like a trans woman of color, or you are in jail, or are an indigenous woman, and it will be very difficult for you to access to some good work. And I don't know, I don't feel that uh, social liberalism do achieve, like, I don't think that it's like inclusivo. How do you say inclusivo? Like
Well,
inclusive.
Yes.
So yeah, that's my that's what I think.
well, it depends a bit which theorists, right? Some of them have really deep views in education. Um, and of course, they would, to play devil's advocate, they would say that if there would be more education, people would be less judgmental and this
Of
exclusion wouldn't
course,
happen. But
but
I do agree with you
mhm.
personally. I think that, I mean, it's almost absurd to be against education, right? And I'm not. But I think the three big things you can hold against it um, are one, indeed, that you still have the reality of the labor market. Um, and if there's no jobs, then this doesn't matter too much, right? Um, the other thing, from a very orthodox Marxist perspective, is that what you, if liberals say it, it depends who talks about education, but if liberals talk about it, education is basically a tool to social mobility, right? So the solution to your problems is that you change position. Not it's the solution to your problem is changing environment, not changing your environment, but changing of environment. So if you're a mechanic, the solution to your problems of low wages is to stop being a mechanic. Yes? From Marx's perspective, the question is, why is the mechanic poor? Not why is he a mechanic, right? Because in Sweden, mechanics are not poor. They're only poor in countries that are organized like that, right? So that's my big frustration with this overemphasis on education, that like you shouldn't have half the jobs be bad jobs. And then like your mission is to not have it's like this dance with the chairs. Like you when it stops, you have to sit in the chair. Like this cannot be society, right? And I know, because I come from a place that is better, I know it doesn't have to be like this. You don't need to be poor if you work in a factory. That is not how it is. Um, has to do with your degree of exploitation, how much money you keep, and how much money goes to the boss. So yeah, that's my problem with it. And third, I would say, but I cannot point at anyone in particular here. But what I hate about people saying education is a solution is that it's super vague. Like, what do you actually mean? Like, what do you want? What's the solution? Because if then, okay, then should the government give money to students? They're like, no, that's crazy. Okay, okay, not that then. Should we massively invest in public transport? No, not that. So, what is it that you want? Like, do I get a higher wage? Like, what's happening? So, I wonder what's like, are taxes gonna go up? Because if you want that more money in education, that money must come somewhere, right? Oh no, we want more taxes. So what does it mean that you want better education concretely? Because very easy to say it, but um, There's a lot of elements to it. Could be interesting though. I hope you have a class on education. Do you have any class on education?
I don't think so.
Okay. It would be nice if your curriculum had like area-specific classes, like social policy, mobility, education, etc., instead of general stuff. Ms. Mariana.
I had a doubt.
Okay.
In theory, well, if social liberalism isn't in favor of war, neoliberals are in favor of war. In theory, well, in practice they are, but in theory.
No. In theory, liberalism is against war because war gets in the way of trade. If you're fighting, you're not selling. So that's why they're not in favor of war in theory. In practice, they are. That's just the empirical historical fact.
And so conservatives are the ones that are in favor of war, theoretically.
Nobody's in favor. Well, there's two ideologies that are more likely to be in favor of war. One is conservatism in one variant, the neoconservative variant, if you remember that, who think that, well, the world will be most ordered if America rules it. So that's one way. And fascism is in favor of war. It's the only ideology that's explicitly even about war, because they believe that conflict brings out the best in people and in nations, right? Competition brings out the best. So we're gonna see who's stronger. But most ideologies don't like war. I think fascism is the only one that explicitly would argue for it.
Okay.
So and most theorists especially are not very war likely. Now, this graph. We have a few minutes left. Let's talk about the text that you sent me a while ago. Now, thank you for doing that. About two concepts of liberty. How was this text to read? I told you it would be difficult. Was it difficult or was it rather easy?
It was not difficult, but enjoyable. It took me like the whole day to read and process the information, but I like it a lot. That's really cool to reflect on things that I just assume. So I like it.
Okay. Anybody else have a strong opinion on the quality of this text? Are you traumatized by it? Are you enthused by it?
If I'm honest, for me it was pretty difficult to read because like too much information in just a little paragraph. So yeah, but it was great. But it was hard to read.
It's real philosophy. Like you just take one word and then you talk about it for 3 hours, right? And apparently there's so much to talk about if you look deep enough, right? Okay. I like it to give it to students just to see what they do with it. What did you think, Mr. Diego, Marcelo?
Oh yeah, it was also really complex for me, and I'm usually a guy that needs to understand really fine what read, so I can read a paragraph 2, 3, 4 times, and I honestly search for it in Spanish to better understand it.
He doesn't help himself with the structure because he kind of starts over sometimes with what he was saying, and then you're not sure where you are. I once stayed up all night and tried to summarize it into a graph, this text. And this is the graph. Because, first of all, he's very misleading. He talks about two concepts of liberty, but he talks about three. Because he's a third one at the end. And at the last part, he starts talking about recognition, which is kind of a type of freedom too. or at least it could be like that. So in short, in case you didn't get it, right? Let me just read this stuff, because I didn't read this yesterday. Negative freedom. Negative freedom is the easy one to understand, right? Negative freedom means that you're not interrupted, that you're not hindered, that something is not there. It's about the word not. That's why it's called negative. Your freedom when you're not hindered, which is easy to understand, but it leads to some questions. Some of you that I saw coming back in your homeworks, like, what are the limits of this, right? What is your minimal freedom? But also, liberalism has this cliche saying that my freedom stops where yours begins. But what does that mean? Because everything you do in some way affects other people, right? Even just watching Netflix means that you're streaming. That means energy is being used somewhere at the other side of the world, which might, I don't know, butterfly effect wise, because Hurricane Honduras, right? Oh, because you had to watch Miguel. So that's an absurd example, right? But there's a lot of things that it's hard to say where exactly they're private. And then what I like about this text is that he comes with different options, but he criticizes them all, right? And he ends on the very, I think, very mature note that you just have to choose. Like that there's no good solution, but that doesn't mean that you cannot pick one, right? I like that way of thinking. So he says in the case of negative freedom, it can still lead to non-freedom, because first of all, it doesn't guarantee anything, right? That's the social liberalist critique. You could be negatively free and die of hunger, and then, well, when you're dead, you're not free. So that doesn't protect us from any type of suffering, and including dying of hunger, which 9 million people do a year in freedom. And the other thing, this is a bit deeper, he says, it's not because I don't harm you that I'm not manipulating you, right? You could be free, you could be offered choices, but as long as one class, which could be any class, controls the media, you could manipulate people, and you're free, but you're still doing what I want you to do. You just don't know it, right? That's the problem there, and that's what positive liberty in his case reacts to. If I'm boring you, you must tell me. So positive liberty here, he used it a little bit different than what we just discussed, right? It's a bit more about control. It's still about actually getting things done, but he has a more psychological approach to it, right? Where it's more about you being the one that's in control, and then basically you following your reason, so you can actually achieve things. And then you get into interesting questions about how much control we have, and how does that interact with opportunities. Like, he comes with this interesting reflection I think you can all recognize, that people, when they can't have something, they will force themselves not to want it. It is the classic is when your boyfriend breaks up with you, and you're like, I didn't like you anyway, right? This reflex people have in life in general with stuff. When they get rejected, they suddenly change their mind that they didn't want it in the first place, and that can be exploited also by capitalism, because you can stop people by demanding something by just rejecting it, and tell them things like, don't desire, only concern yourself with what you can control, right? That it's a perfect Buddhist slogan to turn people into slaves, because, right, don't worry about it, just focus on getting through the day, etc. But with this positive liberty, it can turn paternalistic, right? because you can force people to make the right choices, and you would be in the right to do so because you're right, because you're the rational one. Like your argument is better than theirs. But there is a danger in that, right? There's a danger for freedom because it can lead to some kind of dictatorial notion of it, which reverses the whole thing. And also, if you want control, if you really want control of your life, that means that you need to control people around you, right? Because achieving things in society, you achieve it through other people. It's like if you have the ambition to become governor, well, you need people to vote for you, right? You need other people. You need to manipulate other people to get what you want. So that's a paradox there. I'm talking too much. Do you recognize anything of what I'm saying, Mr. Hugo, or didn't you see any of this in the text? Okay.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. All right, lastly then, am I going over time? No, not yet. Lastly, it talks about recognition. I don't know if you all got to that part, to the last half of the text. But this is kind of like a third way of freedom. It's not really freedom, but it feels like it. Is that there's a difference between able to do something and to be respected for it. Recognition as in to have your choices accepted and taken serious, right? That society recognizes you as a serious person and takes you serious, regardless of what you do. That's another type of freedom, right? This is kind of the identity politics freedom, where, for example, and now we get to very difficult philosophical things where I don't want to say too much, but if you take trans as a movement, right? Trans is very different from gay in the sense that gay is negative freedom. Gay people just want to be left alone, right? They want to do what they want to do in their bedroom, and as long as you don't make that illegal, right? That's okay. And maybe they want some positive freedom in the sense of being able to marry or something. But you being gay or not doesn't depend on my approval, right? Maybe of your parents, but me, I have nothing to do with this, right? If I say to you, well, you're not gay, you're like, ha, right? You just laugh at it and because you know, right? But with trans, it doesn't work like that. If you say I'm a woman or I'm a man, and I'm like, nah, that's a problem to you, right? I need to play along in this, which is a paradox, liberal, because it violates my liberty, right? If Sophia says she's a man, and I clearly see it's not true, because it's not, but I'm somehow forced to play along in your game, right? We have a kind of conflict of freedoms here. It's and I'm going to be very offensive now, but it's almost like you forcing me to recognize your invisible friend, right? Hi, this is Carl. Say hi to Carl. I'm like, hi, Carl, right? The other person needs to play along for it to be real, for you to feel like you have this identity, right? I can't just be like, oh, you do you, dude. Yeah? So you need both sides to play along here, and that's a different type of freedom than either positive or negative freedom, right? Now that's a very touchy example, but you can do the same with nationalities, right, or ethnicities. If you say I'm from this country, and I say that country doesn't exist, then I'm not stopping you, I'm not interfering with your freedom, but I'm still kind of denying you from getting what you want because it involves my approval. So you have certain situations in life where your freedom does depend on other people accepting it, right? And that's kind of confusing category there, where how much do we actually depend on others? I can be free to publish whatever I want, but if nobody reads it, oh yeah, it doesn't really matter. And recognition, he argues, can sometimes overpower other types of freedoms because you want it so bad that you'll do trade-offs. With nationalism, that is very obvious. You want to be independent. Let's say you want to speak your own language or something like that. So you follow whatever leader takes you there, right? Even if that then establishes dictatorship, but at least you feel like you belong. At least you identify with them, right? So this identity drive can sometimes overpower other interests. Um, Again, I talk too much. I see you guys fainting, falling asleep. What do you think of what I just said?
I I have a question
Yes.
for of what you said. Like, then should we call like freedom to everything that a group? Well, I the question is that I didn't truly understand. Like, in one part of the text, he talks about emancipation, about liberation of some groups. And my question is if should we consider as an act of freedom every like time that a group decides to, to seek for their own freedom and security?
Well, there you get stuck because that changes the rest of society, right? And changes other people's freedom. Um, so I don't have a good answer to this. You're talking about national groups, right? Or what type of groups are you talking about?
Well, yeah, for example, indigenous people or women in general, just any social group that is feeling oppressed.
I think you can go both ways with it. I think from a libertarian more perspective, you could say yes, do whatever you want, right? Start your own country. Countries don't matter anyway because the government has no power. So if you want to just have your name and your own flag, capitalism doesn't care, right? Do it. Um, while from a positive freedom perspective, this is not so simple because, for example, like one concrete problem that you have is that of religious sects where this intersects with, where they want to say, oh, we want to be on our own and live in our own communities, right? But if the things that go on in that communities are, let's say they have a different age of consent, for example, than the rest of society, you now get into a conflict between positive freedom and this kind of recognition. Because positive freedom would say that the government should intervene and prevent child abuse, right? While recognition would say no, but these people should be on their own. So I don't have the answers to it, but the problem that you point at is real, and it's something interesting to think about.
Yes, because while I was reading the text, I started to think about some indigenous communities where like they used to change like their own child for a cow, like just like you see
Okay.
here's my son, I want your cow, and
Okay,
that
like an
no,
economic trade,
yeah, an
not like they
economic
raise a
trade.
cow then. Okay, understood first. Okay.
No, like an economic trade.
Okay.
So like of course me, I will say like myself will say the way like the child has rights and it's not like you can sell a human being for a cow, but for them it's just how things should be. So like it starts a problem, or okay, you have your own traditions and me as a state want to, they want you to be okay because you're a part of my cultural sector of society, but at the same time you're acting against the rationality, like that it's more powerful at the moment. So yeah, I had some trouble with it.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And there you get into this kind of positive liberty question of, but do people really know what they want, right? Like, do you actually want that? or do you want it because you need it? Like, if you could not do it, you probably wouldn't do it, right? You wouldn't sell your kid, or you only used to this because you're used to poverty. But if you could have it different, you wouldn't be thinking like this. So that's where positive liberty again comes in and would say that, but I know better than you what's good for you, right? And I'm right in knowing better than you. So to protect your own freedom, I'm going to stop you from doing this. So, and that's what I like about this text is his matureness at the end, that he recognized that you cannot solve these problems. You can talk about them, you can get better at them, but at the end you're trading things, and that comes with freedom, right? Freedom kind of assumes that you won't have it all, and as he says, you have to make choices in politics, and he makes this beautiful argument on how things like this prove that you cannot let politics be bureaucratized. You cannot solve it to an equation. A robot cannot do politics because there's a limit to how far you can calculate things. At some point, you just start trading different things for each other. And it just becomes a matter of more what the majority thinks rather than what some algorithm would say you should do. And I like that because I hate robots. All right, good. Anything else we should talk about, Miss Mariana?
Yeah, at the end, I was like, why are we so focused on this one value if the concept is so broad? And, like, why are we protecting liberty at all costs if we don't know? It's not really specific, like liberty to do what or liberty for whom, or it came with all those questions like what are you actually defending? And yeah, so uh, like, yeah, and then they position liberty and other values in a hierarchy, and liberty is at the top. But why? Like, I understand it for history, like liberty become something important because the church was controlling everything. But now we can make that question, like, why are we defending liberty at all costs if it's not something really specific? Like, what are we defending exactly?
Yeah. Of course, he is a liberal, right? It's clear that he likes freedom, but he's a social liberal. He's going to be a bit more reflexive of it and ask those harder questions that you ask. Good.
Yeah, I want to add something of what Mariana said. Last semester, when we were talking about the Soviet Union, I remember something
Mm-hmm.
that you said really stayed with me. That is that people kind of gave their own freedom, but they were all have shoes, and they were okay. They had jobs, they had vacations. They they were just living life in a good way without
Mm-hmm.
stressing about work or being exploited. And I remember that you also said something like it's like people like decided to give just a little bit of their freedom in order to all people to have some pair of shoes. And that
Mm-hmm.
thing that I was like, well, that's true, because I will truly don't mind to wear like the same outfit every day if I know that some indigenous girl in Oaxaca is, having also some having clothes and having a house, and she just living in a safe environment. So I also put on that. I'm also pretty suspicious why we are so centered in freedom, because also I consider that do I truly want this, or I was socially no I was I learned or did I learn to want that? You know, it's like, do I truly like men, or because I'm a woman, I'm thought that I need to like men? So it's kind of like I know it's pretty intangible. Like you can, it's something pretty subjective in some way,
Mhm.
but it still allows to think like, okay, do I truly want this, or it is because the structure is assigned to make me think that my freedom and my action should go into this stuff. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
We see.
Or is the system trying to trick you into doubting that? This would be like the third layer
Oh,
of that.
yeah, that's nice. Mind blow.
But marketing is all about that. Like, you need this product, and like, it's so obvious. Also,
It's
uh,
obvious, but it works.
but it works. Um,
Movimiento naranja, right? Don't you all want some blonde girlfriend like me? It's working for Samuel.
yeah. Also, in the text, they talk about if I have a liberty, but other people don't have it. Like I'm not comfortable with that. Like in that happens in real life. Like the fact that I have my liberties means that, well, not exactly, but I know that in this world at the same time there's a lot of people that don't have the same freedom as I do. So, like, okay, we have liberty, but if we don't have it for all, it doesn't really matter. I don't know.
Well, a lot of people are very comfortable with that knowledge.
Yes, especially for veganism theory, it states that my freedom to eat meat means that a cow should die. So yeah, it's pretty sad that because we have some privilege, there are some species or humans that are being oppressed by our
Well,
own
let's
species.
not get into this speciesism stuff. Let's keep it. Let's keep it with you know, the human subject as a realm. Although, well, we could talk about that another time. Um, but not next time, because next time we're talking about socialism, which is most definitely about people. Um, so that's what we're going to do next. Class, going to switch back to the left. Well, we kind of made the transition today, right? We kind of walked the middle, and we're going to cross it to the other side. And I'll also upload a new text for next week to read. All right?
All right.
All
Excellent.
right. So, all think of the cows, and I'll see you Thursday. Bye.
Okay, thanks,
Bye,
Doctor. Have a
teacher.
nice day.
Good class.
Yep, you too.